The desert sun hung low over the cracked asphalt of Route 17, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the empty highway. Dust devils swirled in the distance, kicking up grit that stung the eyes of anyone foolish enough to linger. It was one of those forgotten stretches of road, where tumbleweeds rolled like lost souls, and the only witnesses were the ravens perched on rusted fence posts. That's where they found her, little Lily, no more than 7 years old, huddled against the guardrail, her small frame rocking back and forth in a rhythm born of pure desperation. Her clothes were torn at the edges, smudged with dirt from what must have been hours of wandering, and her wide eyes darted wildly, fixed on nothing and everything at once. The signs of distress were clear, the way her hands flapped erratically, the soft, keening whimpers escaping her lips, echoes of an inner storm that no one around could calm. She was alone, utterly and terrifyingly so, in a world that had already proven too harsh for her fragile peace. A semi-truck rumbled past without slowing, its driver too focused on the horizon to notice the tiny figure by the roadside. Minutes ticked by, the heat rising in waves that blurred the air, and Lily's cries grew sharper, piercing the silence like shards of glass. No cars came, no helpful strangers appeared. It was as if the road itself had conspired to leave her there, abandoned to the mercy of the unrelenting sun. Her autism made the isolation even more profound, a barrier that turned every unfamiliar sound into a threat, every empty space into a void she couldn't navigate. Somewhere in the back of a distant mind, perhaps her family's, panic was building, but out here she was invisible, a whisper against the roar of the wind. Then, the low growl of engines shattered the quiet. It started as a distant thunder, building like an approaching storm, until the horizon filled with the gleam of chrome and leather. A convoy of motorcycles crested the rise, their tires humming against the pavement, exhaust pipes spitting faint trails of smoke. At the lead was Jacob Iron Harlan, a towering figure in weathered denim and a scarred leather vest that bore the faded emblem of the Iron Promise, a brotherhood forged in the fires of old wars and unbreakable oaths. Jacob was no stranger to scars. They etched his face like maps of battles long past, from the jungles of forgotten conflicts to the back alleys of border towns. His hands, calloused from years of gripping throttles and tools, still trembled sometimes at night, haunted by promises he'd made to brothers who'd never come home. He'd ridden these roads for decades, chasing the horizon to outrun the ghosts. But today, something pulled him to a halt. The bikes slowed as one, a disciplined wave of steel and loyalty, 20 strong in their formation. Jacob killed his engine first, the sudden silence amplifying Lily's whimpers. He swung his leg over the saddle, boots crunching on gravel as he approached her slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow that could have swallowed her whole. The other riders hung back, engines idling like watchful guardians, their faces a mosaic of tattoos and stern lines, veterans, mechanics, men who'd chosen family over blood. Jacob knelt at a respectful distance, his voice a gravelly rumble, softened by the weight of unseen sorrows. "Hey there, kiddo. You lost?" No response, just the frantic rocking, her gaze locked on the shimmering heat haze. He glanced back at his crew, a silent nod passing between them. They'd seen enough broken things in their lives to know when to step in, no questions asked. From the saddlebag of his bike, Jacob pulled a small, battered device, an old MP3 player, the kind that looked like it had survived a dozen dust storms. It was an odd relic for a man like him, who lived by the roar of Harleys and the code of the road. But music had been his anchor once, back when the world was noise and chaos, a way to silence the echoes of lost comrades. He scrolled through the playlist with thick fingers, landing on a piece that had carried him through dark nights. Bach's Air on the G-string, its strings weaving a tapestry of calm amid the storm. He pressed play, and the notes spilled out, delicate, soaring, a violin's gentle plea against the cello's steady embrace. The sound cut through the desert air like a cool breeze, unexpected and pure. Lily's rocking stuttered, her hands pausing mid-flap as the melody wrapped around her. For the first time, her eyes focused, not on the void, but on Jacob, then on the tiny speaker in his palm. The whimpers faded, replaced by a tentative stillness, as if the music had unlocked a hidden door in her mind. Jacob sat back on his heels, the classical strains filling the space between them, the other bikers watching in quiet awe. One by one, they cut their engines, the convoy transforming from a thunderous force to a circle of silent sentinels. The sun dipped lower, painting the scene in golden hues, the chrome of their bikes glinting like armor in an ancient tale. As the piece swelled to its poignant close, Lily reached out a trembling hand, not in fear, but curiosity. Her fingers brushed the device, and for a fleeting moment a smile cracked her dust-streaked face, a spark of connection in the wilderness. Jacob's heart, armored for so long, cracked open just a fraction. He'd stopped for a child in need, fulfilling an unspoken promise to the road's forgotten souls, but in that instant he sensed the shift. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something profound, a thread pulling him back from the edges of his own isolation. Little did he know, her response would unravel the knots of his past, binding him to a new oath, one of redemption, where the roar of engines met the whisper of strings, and a tough biker's world tilted toward the light. The convoy reformed around them, Jacob gently scooping Lily into his arms as she clung to the player, the music looping softly. They rode toward the nearest town, a dusty speck called Haven's Edge, where questions awaited and secrets would begin to surface. Jacob's mind raced ahead, memories of his own lost innocence surfacing like ghosts in the rear view. A promise made to a sibling long gone, buried under layers of leather and regret. As the miles blurred by, the wind carrying the faint echo of Bach, he realized this child's silent gratitude had ignited a fire he thought extinguished. The iron promise brotherhood, bound by loyalty forged in fire, would rally once more, not for vengeance, but for the quiet justice of second chances. In Haven's Edge, the local sheriff's station loomed like a relic from another era, its neon sign flickering against the twilight. Jacob pulled up front, Lily still nestled against his chest, her breathing steady now, lulled by the rhythm of the road. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Elias with eyes that had seen too much cynicism, stepped out, his badge catching the last rays of sun. "What's this about?" "Ah," he grunted, eyeing the line of bikes with wary suspicion. "Found her on 17, Jacob replied, his voice steady as he dismounted. "Alone? Name's Lily, from what I could gather from the tag on her shoe. She's special, needs folks who understand." He handed her over carefully, but not before Lily's hand tightened on his vest, a plea in her eyes that spoke volumes. Elias nodded, radioing for social services, but Jacob lingered, the music player's glow a beacon in his pocket. Word spread fast in a town like this. By nightfall, the Iron Promise crew had set up camp at the edge of town, fires crackling under a star-lit sky that mirrored the scars on Jacob's soul. He'd lost his way after the war, drifting from one promise to another, but Lily's response, that pure, unfiltered joy in the notes, stirred something dormant. As he sat by the flames, the scent of pine smoke mingling with engine oil, he pulled out an old photo from his wallet. A younger him with his sister, both smiling before the accident that shattered their world. "I promised you'd always have music," he whispered to the night, the weight of forgotten vows pressing down. The next morning brought complications. Elias pulled Jacob aside, his face etched with concern. Families from out of state, rough situation, folks in debt skipping town. Girl's been through hell from what the reports say. Signs of neglect, but nothing we can pin down easy. Jacob's jaw tightened, the moral compass of his brotherhood spinning toward action. Corruption lingered in the air, whispers of officials turning blind eyes for the right price. But Jacob had faced worse. The iron promise didn't ride for glory, but for honor, the kind that outlasted bullets and badges. As the day unfolded, Lily's case drew eyes from higher up, a web of institutional neglect unraveling thread by thread. Jacob, drawn back to the station by an inexplicable pull, found her in a stark room, rocking again, the music player confiscated as evidence. Her distress reignited his resolve. Slipping past the indifferent clerk, he played the piece once more, the strings weaving their magic. Lily's calm returned, and in that moment she pointed to a faded drawing in her pocket, a crude sketch of a motorcycle under stars. It was a sign, a bridge between their worlds. By evening, the crew mobilized subtly, calls going out to old allies, a nurse named Grace, who'd patched them up in tougher times, a veteran lawyer with a code as ironclad as their own. Jacob's past collided with the present, the promise to his sister echoing in Lily's eyes. This child, with her silent response to beauty amid chaos, was becoming the key to his redemption, a reminder that loyalty wasn't just to brothers on bikes, but to the vulnerable souls the road left behind. As the sun set once more, engines revved in preparation, the horizon promising trials that would test every bond. Jacob rode into the fray, not as a lone wolf, but as the heart of a chosen family, where one note of music could rewrite a lifetime of silence. The first light of dawn crept over Haven's edge like a hesitant intruder, painting the ramshackle buildings in hues of pale gold and lingering shadow. The air carried the sharp tang of dew-kissed sagebrush mixed with the faint acrid bite of cooling engine oil from the bikes lined up outside the motel. Jacob Harlan hadn't slept much. His mind replayed the scene on Route 17 like a loop of faded film reel, the child's wide eyes locking onto the music, her tentative smile cracking through the dust. He sat on the edge of the sagging bed, the old photo of his sister clutched in one hand, its edges worn soft from years of silent confessions. Emily's face stared back at him, frozen in that last summer before the crash. Her laughter a ghost that the Bach melody had somehow summoned anew. "Kept my word for you last night," he murmured to the empty room, the words heavy with the rust of unspoken regret. A knock rattled the thin door, pulling him from the reverie. It was Marcus, his second in command, a broad-shouldered vet with a salt-and-pepper beard and eyes that held the quiet fire of shared battles. The iron promise ran deep in Marcus. He'd been the one to drag Jacob from the bottle after the war, binding them in oaths thicker than blood. "Crew's up, Iron. Coffee's brewing by the fire pit. Elias called, says social services is en route from the city. They're taking the girl to a facility up north, someplace called Willow Grove." Marcus's voice was low, edged with the gravel of concern. Jacob nodded, tucking the photo away, but the knot in his gut tightened. Facilities like that were sterile cages, places where fragile spirits like Lily's got lost in paperwork and protocols, far from the open road that breathed life into the weary. They stepped out into the crisp morning, the motel's gravel crunching under their boots like brittle bones. The brotherhood stirred around the cluster of Harleys, 20 men strong, their vests patched with the Iron Promise emblem, a stylized chain linking fists in unbreakable grip. Fires from the night before smoldered in pits ringed with stones, sending wisps of smoke curling toward the awakening sky. The scent of percolating coffee mingled with the earthy aroma of frying bacon from a portable grill, a ritual that grounded them amid the chaos. Jacob accepted a tin mug from Lena, the crew's unofficial medic, a no-nonsense nurse with calloused hands, and a tattoo of a phoenix rising from surgical scars. She'd lost her own kid to the system's indifference years back, turning her loyalty to the road's wanderers. "Heard about the little one," she said, her voice soft but steady. "That music trick, smart. But if they're shipping her off, we need a plan. Can't let the suits bury her story. By mid-morning, the sheriff's station buzzed with unwelcome energy. Elias paced the linoleum floor, his badge glinting under fluorescent lights that hummed like distant swarms. Lily sat in a corner chair, her small legs swinging just above the ground, hands twisting the hem of a too-big sweater they'd found for her. The music player lay on the desk, cordoned off with yellow tape as if it were contraband rather than a lifeline. Her rocking had returned, subtle but insistent, a metronome of unease in the sterile air. Jacob entered with Marcus flanking him, the door's bell jangling like a warning shot. Elias looked up, his face a map of fatigue lines. "Harlan, didn't expect you back so soon. Social workers delayed. Road closure up the interstate. But the report's coming together. Parents are ghosts. Skipped out on debts, left her with a relative who... Well, let's say the home wasn't safe. Signs of neglect, isolation. Kids got autism, records confirm. Willow Grove's equipped for that. Therapy, structure." Jacob's eyes flicked to Lily, catching the way her gaze darted to the tape device, a silent plea etched in her furrowed brow. Structure? It sounded like another word for forgotten, the kind of place where promises dissolved in red tape. He leaned against the counter, his leather creaking softly. She responded to the music, Sheriff, calmed right down. "That's more than any chart's gonna tell you." Elias sighed, rubbing his neck. "Appreciate the help getting her here, but this is procedure. Higher-ups are watching. Budget cuts mean we push cases through fast. Can't have loose ends." The words hung heavy, laced with the undercurrent of compromise Jacob knew too well. Officials bending rules for convenience, turning blind eyes to the human cost. As the social worker finally arrived, an overworked woman named Clara with a clipboard clutched like a shield. The tension thickened. She reviewed the files briskly, her pen scratching notes that sealed fates. Lily's distress peaked, her whimpers rising like a tide, hands flapping against the chair's arms. Jacob couldn't stand it. Ignoring Clara's raised eyebrow, he stepped forward, his voice a low rumble. "Mind if I try something?" Before protest could form, he retrieved the player from the desk, the tape snapping under his firm grip, a small act of defiance that echoed the Brotherhood's code. He hit play, and the violin strings unfurled once more, Bach's air weaving through the room like sunlight piercing clouds. The effect was immediate. Lily's movements slowed, her body unfolding from its defensive curl. She slid to the floor, inching closer to Jacob, her eyes tracing invisible patterns in the air as the melody built. Clara paused, clipboard forgotten, watching as the child's face softened, a rare peace settling over her features. For a heartbeat, the station felt less like a cage and more like a sanctuary, the music bridging the chasm of misunderstanding. Marcus stood sentinel by the door, his presence a quiet assurance that the iron promise had her back. But Clara recovered, clearing her throat. "That's touching. But we have protocols. The family's history, debts tied to shady dealings. Relatives might be involved in something bigger. We need to protect her, get her evaluated properly." Jacob knelt beside Lily as the piece faded, her small hand finding his sleeve, holding on with a trust that pierced his armored heart. Protection? It rang hollow against the corruption he'd sniffed out in Elias's hesitant tone. Whispers of payoffs to overlook neglect, officials pocketing funds meant for kids like her. His own past surged up, the promise to Emily, to shield the innocent after their parents' neglect led to that fateful night. He'd failed then, drifting into the Brotherhood's embrace, but Lily's grip anchored him now. "Protocols don't see her," he said evenly, meeting Clara's gaze. "We do." Word of the standoff rippled through the crew outside, engines idling like a gathering storm. Lena arrived with Grace, the veteran lawyer from a neighboring chapter, her briefcase a weapon forged in courtroom battles. Grace had pulled strings for the Iron Promise before, defending riders against crooked cops. her moral compass unyielding as the desert wind. "Let's talk custody angles," she murmured to Jacob, eyes scanning the reports. Temporary guardianship. Prove the system's failing her. As they huddled, Lily's drawing resurfaced from her pocket, the motorcycle under stars, now joined by a crude violin. It was a map of sorts, pointing to the bonds forming beyond blood. By afternoon, the station's air grew charged, Clara on the phone with superiors, Elias mediating with reluctant fairness. Jacob felt the weight of old oaths pressing down, the redemption he'd chased on endless roads, crystallizing in this child's quiet response. The iron promise, mobilized subtly, calls to allies in child welfare, quiet inquiries into the family's tangled debts that hinted at institutional rot. Marcus clapped Jacob's shoulder as they stepped out into the blazing sun. "This ride's just starting, brother, for her and for us." The horizon stretched wide, promising ethical storms ahead, where loyalty would clash with corruption, and one biker's forgotten promise would ignite a chain of unbreakable justice. As engines roared to life, the faint echo of strings lingered in Jacob's ears, a symphony of second chances unfolding. The afternoon sun beat down on Haven's edge like a relentless interrogator, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage that distorted the line of Harleys parked in the station's lot. Dust motes danced in the heat, kicked up by the occasional boot scuff or the low murmur of voices from the Brotherhood gathered at the edge of the shade. Jacob wiped sweat from his brow, the salt stinging the faint scars that crisscrossed his forehead like faded lightning. The air hummed with the faint buzz of cicadas, undercut by the distant rumble of a truck hauling freight along the outskirts, a reminder that the world kept moving, indifferent to the fragile battles fought in small towns like this. Inside the station, the confrontation simmered, but out here the iron promise prepared, their loyalty a quiet force coiling like a spring. Marcus leaned against his bike, arms crossed over his broad chest, the leather of his vest creaking softly as he scanned the horizon. "Grace is digging into those debts," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried the weight of strategy sessions from darker days. "Says the parents' trail leads to some shell company up north, loans from folks who don't play clean. Relatives might be complicit, turning a blind eye for a cut." Jacob nodded, his gaze fixed on the station door, where Lily's faint outline was visible through the grimy window. The child's drawing burned in his pocket now, its simple lines a talisman against the encroaching bureaucracy. He'd promised Emily music in the chaos, a vow shattered by neglect that mirrored the one shadowing Lily's life. Redemption wasn't a straight road. It twisted through regrets, demanding payment in full. Lena approached from the motel's direction, her steps purposeful, a folder tucked under one arm. The nurse's face, lined from years of stitching wounds both seen and unseen, held a steely resolve. "Pulled some strings with my contacts at the regional clinic," she said, handing the folder to Jacob. "Records on the family, sparse but enough. The relative she was left with, history of instability, whispers of overlooked complaints, no outright violence but the isolation. It's like they walled her off from the world." Her words hung in the air, laced with the scent of antiseptic that clung to her clothes, a ghost of hospital corridors where hope often flatlined. Jacob flipped through the pages, the paper crinkling like dry leaves under his calloused fingers. Photos showed a rundown trailer, its yard choked with weeds, and Lily's school reports marked with notes on behavioral challenges that screamed misunderstanding more than malice. Inside, the tension crested as Clara paced the narrow office, her phone pressed to her ear, voice clipped with frustration. "Yes, I understand the timeline, but the evaluator needs to see her in context. No, the music device isn't relevant. Standard procedure." Lily huddled in the corner, knees drawn up, her rocking a subtle sway that matched the tick of the wall clock. The confiscated player sat on the desk, its screen dark, a silent sentinel. Elias hovered nearby, his mustache twitching with unease, the badge on his chest a weight he bore with growing reluctance. Jacob pushed through the door, the bells jangle, cutting the room like a knife's edge. "Enough with the procedures," he said, his tone even but unyielding, the gravel in his voice echoing the rumble of engines outside. "She's not a case file. She's a kid who needs real help. Not a shuffle to some warehouse upstate." Clara lowered the phone, her eyes narrowing behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Harlan, your intentions are noble, but you're outsiders. The system protects her. Evaluations, therapy, stability." Stability. The word tasted like ash in Jacob's mouth, evoking memories of his own post-war drift. Therapy sessions that felt like interrogations. Stability promised, but delivered as isolation. He knelt beside Lily, pulling the drawing from his pocket and unfolding it gently. "Look," he said softly, holding it where she could see. Her eyes latched on, the motorcycle and violin blurring slightly in the dim light, and her rocking eased, replaced by a tentative reach. Her fingers traced the lines, a small hum escaping her lips, not quite the melody, but an echo, pure and untaught. Elias cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Harlan, I get it. Seen too many kids slip through cracks myself. But if there's corruption in the mix, those debts tying back to local interests, we can't just bulldoze in." His confession hung there, a crack in the facade, revealing the sheriff's own moral bind. A town reliant on fragile economies, where turning eyes from shady dealings kept the lights on. Jacob rose slowly, the room's stale air thick with the scent of old coffee and tension. "Then help us expose it. The iron promise doesn't ride blind. We've got allies, vets, lawyers, folks who've beaten the system before." Clara hesitated, her clipboard a shield lowering just a fraction as Lily's hum grew, drawing her gaze. Outside, the crew sensed the shift, engines firing up in a low chorus that vibrated through the ground like a heartbeat. Grace emerged from a borrowed truck, her briefcase swinging like a gavel. "Got a lead," she announced, joining the huddle. "The shell company, linked to a developer pushing for land grabs around here. Parents owed big, vanished after signing over collateral. Maybe the kid was part of the leverage, left behind to quiet questions." The pieces clicked, a web of neglect woven with greed, institutional blindness, the thread that held it taut. Jacob's past flooded back, his parents' debts, the crash that claimed Emily, a promise to protect the vulnerable he'd buried under miles of blacktop. Lily's response to the music had cracked that burial, pulling him into the light. As dusk bled across the sky, painting the desert in strokes of crimson and indigo, the group convened around a flickering fire pit at the motel's edge. Sparks rose like fleeting stars, carrying the smoky aroma of mesquite wood and charred marshmallows, a brief nod to normalcy amid the storm. Lily sat cross-legged nearby. The player returned to her hands after Grace's legal maneuvering, Bach looping softly from its tinny speaker. Her presence grounded them, a tiny anchor in the ethical tide. Marcus passed around a flask, the burn of whiskey a ritual seal on their oaths. "We ride for her tomorrow," he said, eyes reflecting the flames. "Infiltrate Willow Grove's intake, document the rot. No violence, just truth." Jacob watched Lily, her head tilting to the violin's swell, a smile ghosting her lips that mirrored the one he'd imagined for Emily in quieter dreams. The brotherhood encircled them, vests glinting in the firelight. A chosen family forged in loss and loyalty. Corruption loomed like storm clouds on the horizon, but here, in the whisper of strings and the growl of engines, redemption took shape, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet fulfillment of promises long carried. As night deepened, the first stars pricked the velvet sky, and Jacob felt the weight lift, if only slightly. The road ahead twisted toward justice, where one child's melody could harmonize a lifetime of silence, binding scars into strength. The stars wheeled overhead in their silent vigil, casting a cool, ethereal light over the motel's fire pit, where the iron-promised brotherhood lingered like shadows given form. The crackle of dying embers punctuated the night, releasing bursts of sparks that danced upward, mirroring the flicker of resolve in Jacob's eyes. Lily had drifted off against his side, her breathing a soft counterpoint to the faint strains of Bach, still emanating from the player cradled in her lap, its battery a stubborn heartbeat against the encroaching dark. The whiskey flask made its final rounds, the sharp tang lingering on tongues and in the air, binding the men in a ritual as old as their oaths. Marcus stoked the fire one last time, his silhouette broad against the flames, before the group dispersed to their tents and bikes, the gravel whispering under retreating boots. Jacob remained, the weight of Lily's trust a new anchor, pulling him from the drift he'd known for years. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by echoes, the violin's plea intertwining with the screech of tires from that long-ago night, Emily's laughter dissolving into silence. Dawn broke with a vengeance, the sun clawing over the jagged horizon, bathing Haven's edge in a fierce, unforgiving glow. The air hummed with purpose as the crew roused, engines coughing to life in a symphony of low growls that vibrated through the ground like an awakening beast. Jacob secured Lily in the sidecar of his Harley, a makeshift cradle padded with blankets from Lena's kit, her small form bundled against the morning chill. The drawing, now a shared talisman, tucked safely in his vest beside the faded photo that had become his compass. "Hold on, kid," he murmured, her eyes meeting his with a clarity that pierced deeper than words, a silent pact forged in melody. The ride to Willow Grove cut through miles of arid scrubland, the highway unspooling like a vein of black tar under their tires. Dust trailed in their wake, a hazy banner announcing their approach, the scent of sage and hot rubber filling Jacob's nostrils with every twist of the throttle. Marcus led the flank, his bike a steady shadow, while Lena and Grace followed in a nondescript van, laden with documents and quiet determination. The facility loomed on the outskirts of a nameless town, its whitewashed walls and chain-link fences a sterile fortress against the wild world beyond. Intake procedures awaited, a gauntlet of forms and evaluations that Clara had insisted upon, her voice over the phone laced with the brittle edge of obligation. But Jacob sensed the undercurrents, the way Elias's reports hinted at funding shortfalls, corners cut to appease higher powers whose hands were stained with the same greed that had ensnared Lily's family. They arrived as the sun climbed to midday, its heat pressing down like an unseen hand. The gates creaked open under Grace's forged credentials, a temporary pass bought with favors from old contacts in the legal shadows. Inside, the grounds were a paradox. Manicured lawns hiding the echo of distant cries, order masking the chaos of overlooked souls. Lily's intake room was a bland cube of beige walls and fluorescent hum, the air thick with the chemical tang of cleaners that couldn't erase the pall of despair. A caseworker named Harlan, irony not lost on Jacob, greeted them with a clipboard and a practiced smile, her eyes skimming Lily with clinical detachment. "Standard eval first," she said, gesturing to a table strewn with puzzles and charts. "We'll assess responsiveness, then discuss placement." Jacob's jaw tightened as Lily recoiled from the stranger's touch, her rocking resuming with frantic intensity, hands flapping like wings trapped in a cage. The player was scrutinized, nearly confiscated again, but Grace intervened with a flash of paperwork. "Evidence of therapeutic value," she stated flatly, her voice a blade honed by years of advocacy. As the eval began, Jacob hovered in the doorway, the Brotherhood stationed discreetly outside, some feigning maintenance on their bikes, others blending into the visitor lot like ghosts in leather. The moral rot revealed itself in fragments, Harlan's offhand mention of budget reallocations that funneled aid to private donors, whispers of the shell company tied to facility board members, Lily's family debts, collateral in a larger scheme, where vulnerable kids became bargaining chips for land deals that swallowed small towns whole. The breaking point came mid-afternoon, when Lily's distress peaked during a sensory test, her whimpers escalating to a wail that echoed down the sterile halls. Jacob couldn't watch. He slipped the player into her hands, defying the workers' protest, and hit play. The strings unfurled once more, a gentle tide washing over the room, and Lily's cries softened, her body stilling as she traced patterns on the table's edge. Harlan paused, pen hovering, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing her face. "That's remarkable," she admitted, her clipboard lowering. In that suspended moment, Grace pounced, laying out the evidence, connections between the debts, the relatives' complicity, and the facility's own ties to the corruption. "This isn't protection," Grace said, her tone measured but unyielding. "It's perpetuation. We're requesting an independent review, guardianship under the Iron Promise Network, proven stability through our veteran programs." Tensions ignited as supervisors were summoned, the room filling with the murmur of urgent calls and shifting alliances. Outside, Marcus signaled from the lot, his nod confirming allies in place. A reporter from a fringe outlet, hungry for stories of institutional failure, and a whistleblower nurse who'd seen too many cases buried. Jacob knelt by Lily, the music looping like a lifeline, her hand finding his once more. The response in her eyes, that pure, unbridled connection, stirred the embers of his redemption, echoing the promise to Emily he'd thought forever broken. Corruption's web tightened, officials circling with veiled threats of charges for interference, but the Brotherhood's loyalty held firm, a chain no badge could sever. As evening shadows lengthened across the grounds, the standoff evolved into negotiation, Grace's briefcase a vault of truths prying open sealed doors. Lily's drawing was presented as testament, its simple strokes a poetic indictment of neglect. Jacob felt the scars of his past knit tighter, the weight of silence lifting with each note. The road to justice twisted sharper now, demanding sacrifices from men who'd already given much. But in Lily's quiet hum, joining the melody, he saw the horizon clear. The Iron Promise would ride through the storm, not for vengeance, but for the honor of promises kept, where one child's response wove redemption into the fabric of chosen kin, turning isolation into unbreakable symphony. If this chapter's tale of quiet courage is stirring something in you, give it a like to help spread these stories of hope and honor further. The twilight draped Willow Grove in a shroud of bruised purple, the facility's floodlights humming to life like wary eyes scanning the encroaching dusk. Shadows stretched long across the manicured lawns, twisting the chain-link fences into jagged silhouettes that clawed at the fading sky. The air cooled rapidly, carrying the faint, metallic tang of irrigated grass mingled with the oily residue from the Harleys idling just beyond the gates. A low, persistent growl that vibrated through the ground like an unspoken challenge. Jacob stood in the intake room's doorway, his broad frame blocking the fluorescent glare, the weight of Lily's small hand still warm against his calloused palm. The music had looped to silence now, the player's battery flickering its last, but the echo of those strings lingered in the air, a fragile thread holding back the tide of institutional indifference. Inside, the negotiation unfolded like a tense standoff in a dimly lit saloon, voices low and edged, with the scrape of authority clashing against resolve. Grace paced the beige-carpeted floor, her heels clicking a rhythmic counterpoint to the distant whir of air conditioners straining against the desert heat. Papers rustled from her briefcase, each document a carefully laid trap, exposing the web of corruption. Bank transfers from the shell company to facility donors, overlooked complaints from families like Lily's, and memos hinting at falsified evaluations to clear beds for higher-paying cases. Harlan, the caseworker, sat rigid behind her desk, fingers drumming on the clipboard as if willing it to shield her from the unraveling truth. "This is speculative," she insisted, her voice thin but defiant, eyes darting to the one-way mirror where unseen supervisors lurked. "We follow protocols for her safety. Guardianship claims from outsiders. That's not how this works." Jacob's gaze never left Lily, who sat cross-legged on the linoleum, her fingers tracing invisible notes in the air, a soft hum escaping her lips, an improvised melody born from the back she'd absorbed like parched, earth-drinking rain. The drawing lay unfolded between them, its motorcycle and violin, now annotated with crayons, scavenged from the evil kit, stars connecting the figures in a child's vision of alliance. It was more than art. It was evidence of a bond the system couldn't quantify, a silent testimony to the redemption stirring in Jacob's chest. Memories of Emily flooded him unbidden, her own love for music, the violin lessons cut short by their parents' neglect, the crash that left him clutching a shattered promise. He'd ridden for years to bury that failure, the iron promise his armor, but Lily's response had pried it open, revealing the man beneath the scars. Marcus slipped into the room, his presence a solid wall of quiet support, sweat beading on his brow from the lot where the crew maintained their vigil. "Allies are in position," he murmured to Jacob, low enough to evade the mirror's ears. "The reporters got wind. Anonymous tip on the funding trail, and Lena's chatting up the night nurse. She's seen the shortcuts. The kids medicated to quiet complaints." His words carried the scent of hot metal and resolve, a reminder that the Brotherhood's reach extended beyond leather and chrome, into networks of chosen kin who'd weathered their own storms. Elias had arrived too, pulled from Haven's Edge by a reluctant sense of duty, his cruiser parked discreetly among the bikes. The sheriff's face, etched with the lines of compromises past, softened as he watched Lily's hum grow steadier, a bridge across the chasm of misunderstanding. Clara, summoned from the city, entered with a flurry of folders, her earlier poise cracked by the mounting evidence. "The debts are verified," she admitted, sinking into a chair, the vinyl creaking under her weight. "Parents vanished after leveraging family assets. The relative was paid to keep quiet, but it backfired. Lily was isolated, left to fend in a home that ignored her needs." Her voice faltered, the clinical detachment giving way to a flicker of empathy, the room's stale air thickening with the unspoken horror of neglect's quiet violence. No graphic scars marred Lily's skin, but the signs were there in her wary glances, the way she'd flinch at sudden noises, the echoes of a world that had turned its back. Jacob knelt beside her, his voice a gravelly whisper. "You're safe now, kid. We've got you." Her eyes met his, clear and trusting, a response that sealed his oath anew to honor Emily's memory by shielding this child from the same shadows. The supervisors emerged from behind the mirror, a trio of suited figures with clipped tones and averted eyes, their briefcases bulging with legal shields. "This facility operates under state oversight," the lead one declared, a man named Victor with a tie too tight for the heat. "Any interference could be seen as obstruction. The girl's placement is final. Willow Grove for evaluation, then foster integration." But Grace was relentless, her arguments a scalpel dissecting their defenses, violations of moral protection guidelines, conflicts of interest with the shell company that funded half the board's pet projects. Elias stepped forward, his badge a reluctant ally. "I've turned a blind eye before, for the town's sake. But this, covering for greed that hurts kids, counts as corruption in my book. The room pulsed with tension, the hum of Lily's melody the only counterpoint, drawing even Victor's gaze, his facade cracking as she extended the drawing toward him, an innocent plea amid the fray. Outside the night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky like distant witnesses. The crew's engines revved sporadically, a subtle pressure that filtered through the walls, reminding all of the Iron Promise's unyielding loyalty. Lena joined the huddle, her medic bag slung over one shoulder, recounting the whistleblowers' tales. Meds doled out to pacify, reports buried to meet quotas, the facility a cog in a machine greased by the same debts that had orphaned Lily. Jacob felt the ethical storm cresting, his past colliding with the present, the war's ghosts whispering of broken brothers, the road's endless chase for absolution. This wasn't just about one child. It was the fulfillment of vows to protect the vulnerable, to stand against the corruption that preyed on the silent. As midnight approached, the negotiation teetered on a knife's edge. Victor's phone buzzed with incoming calls, the reporter's story breaking online, allies in welfare offices pulling strings for an emergency audit. Clara nodded to Grace, a concession forming. Temporary stay with vetted guardians, pending review. But it has to be clean, no vigilante moves. Jacob scooped Lily into his arms, her weight light as a promise kept. The player's final notes fading into the night. The gates swung open, the convoy reforming under the moon's pale gaze, dust swirling in their wake like a liberated sigh. Redemption's path twisted onward, toward dawn's moral reckoning, where loyalty's chain would bind the broken pieces into something whole, a symphony of scars healed by quiet courage and unbreakable bonds. The horizon beckoned, engines roaring toward the light, one note at a time. The moon hung high over the open road, a silver sentinel casting its glow on the convoy as it carved through the night toward Haven's edge. Engines thrummed in unison, a deep, resonant pulse that drowned out the whisper of wind through the scrublands, carrying the faint, lingering scent of exhaust and desert sage. Jacob rode at the lead, Lily secure in the sidecar, her small form bundled in a blanket that Lena had warmed over the fire pit. The child's head rested against the padded side, her breathing steady, occasionally punctuated by a soft hum that mimicked the violin's graceful arcs from earlier. The player, recharged in the van, sat silent now, but its magic lingered, a bridge between their worlds that no bureaucracy could sever. Behind them, the Iron Promise stretched like a chain of light, 20 bikes strong, their chrome catching the moonlight in fleeting sparks, Marcus and the others forming a protective phalanx against the shadows of doubt. Jacob's mind raced ahead, the cool rush of air against his scarred face, stirring memories long buried under layers of leather and resolve. Emily's face flickered in his thoughts, not as a ghost of failure, but as a guiding light. The sister he'd promised to shield from their parents' unraveling world, a vow shattered by neglect that echoed Lily's plight. The crash had stolen her, leaving him adrift in the war's aftermath. But tonight, with the child's trust warming his side, that promise reformed, tempered by years on the road. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was this ride, the fulfillment of loyalty to the vulnerable chosen family over blood's fragile ties. The facility's gates receded in the rear view, their sterile gleam fading, but the battle wasn't over. Victor's concessions had bought time, a temporary guardianship under the Iron Promise's veteran support network, but the web of corruption demanded uprooting, lest it ensnare more like Lily. Dawn broke as they crested the rise into Haven's edge, the sky bleeding pink and gold across the ramshackle rooftops, the air crisp with the promise of renewal. The motel lot, still scarred from their campfire rings, welcomed them like an old ally, gravel crunching under tires as the convoy halted in a disciplined arc. Lily stirred, her eyes blinking open to the first light, a tentative smile curving her lips as she reached for Jacob's arm. He dismounted slowly, lifting her with the care of one handling fragile hope, her weight a reminder of oaths renewed. The crew gathered, faces etched with the quiet satisfaction of a skirmish won, but eyes sharp for the trials ahead. Lena approached first, her medic bag slung low, checking Lily with gentle efficiency. "She's holding steady," she said, her voice soft amid the settling dust. "That hum of hers, it's progress, a way she's reaching out." Word from Grace arrived via radio crackle from the van. The reporter's story had ignited a firestorm, anonymous sources flooding lines with tales of similar oversights at Willow Grove. The shell company's ties to the facility unraveled publicly, donors scrambling to distance themselves as audits loomed like gathering storms. Clara, redeemed in her own quiet way, had forwarded the family's records. Debts forgiven in a plea deal. The relatives' complicity exposed, without the need for confrontation. Elias pulled up in his cruiser, dust swirling from his tires, his face lighter than Jacob had seen, the badge on his chest, now a symbol of reclaimed integrity. "State stepping in," he reported, leaning against the hood, the morning sun glinting off his keys. "Independent review for Lily. Your network's petition carried weight. No more shuffling. She's got a path forward with folks who see her." The station became their makeshift headquarters that morning, the linoleum floors echoing with purposeful steps rather than tension. Lily sat at a cleared desk, crayons in hand, expanding her drawing into a mural of motorcycles circling a violin under a starry sky, symbols of the family she'd found in the roar of engines and the whisper of strings. Jacob watched from the corner, a tin mug of coffee steaming in his grip, its bitter warmth grounding him as the pieces aligned. His past, once a chain of regrets, intertwined with this child's future. The promise to Emily evolving into guardianship. The iron promises resources, therapy through veteran programs, a home on the road's edge, offering stability without cages. Marcus clapped his shoulder, the gesture heavy with brotherhood. "You started this with a tune, Iron. Now it's a symphony. For her, for Emily, for all the ones we couldn't save before." By midday, the official papers arrived. Stamped and binding. Temporary custody to Jacob Harlan, with the crew's collective backing as extended support. Clara oversaw the signing, her clipboard set aside, a rare smile softening her features. "You've shown what protocols miss," she said, glancing at Lily's mural. "Heart, loyalty, it's what she needs." No fanfare marked the moment, just the scratch of pens and the child's contented hum, a melody that filled the room like sunlight. Outside, the Brotherhood revved engines in salute, a thunderous chorus that shook the windows, dust devils swirling in joyful chaos. Jacob scooped Lily up, her arms looping around his neck, the trust in her eyes a balm to old scars. They stepped into the sun, the air alive with the scent of blooming creosote, the horizon stretching wide and forgiving. The ride back to the open road was unhurried, the convoy weaving through sun-dappled canyons where shadows played like old friends. Lily rode with Jacob, the sidecar her throne, the player now clipped to the handlebar, Bach resuming its gentle weave as miles blurred by. Conversations crackled over radios, plans for a safe haven, a ranch on Iron Promised Land where music rooms adjoined workshops, therapy blending with the rhythm of engines. Jacob felt the weight lift, his heart's armor yielding to the light of second chances. Emily's photo, tucked in his vest beside Lily's drawing, seemed warmer now, a legacy of honor fulfilled. Corruption's shadow retreated, exposed by truth and unyielding bonds, proving that justice came not from force, but from standing firm in moral quietude. As evening fell, they camped under a canopy of stars, fires crackling with tales of rides past and promises kept. Lily, nestled by the flames, traced notes in the dirt, her hum joining the night symphony. Jacob sat beside her, the brotherhood encircling like guardians eternal. This was family chosen, forged in loss, tempered by loyalty, redeemed in the response of one small soul to a forgotten melody. The road ahead promised more twists, but with Lily's light guiding, Jacob rode toward it unburdened, his life forever changed by the courage of a single silent note. Thank you for riding with us through this tale of quiet redemption and unbreakable bonds. If it touched your heart, please subscribe for more stories of honor on the horizon.